welcome to the very first episode of the Footy Frontline Podcast, brought to you by My Betting Mate. I am your host, Nick Tabato, and today I'm joined by Oliver Caffrey. Oliver, the season's just upon us. How are you feeling going into the new year?
Yeah, it's definitely starting. It feels like it's starting very soon this year. We've got the opening round up in Sydney and Brisbane. So, yeah, looking forward to a big 2024.
Feels a bit funny that footy's starting a little bit earlier. Usually it's another week or another two, but we've got those 4 games this weekend as well. What are your feelings going into opening rounds? A bit of an odd one, 4 games to start the year instead of the usual 9 or previous to that 8. How are you feeling going into this new concept?
Yeah, the AFL obviously wants to expand, but just increase their footprint into New South Wales and Queensland. The 2 Sydney clubs and then Brisbane and the Gold Coast have been sort of feeling like they're getting left behind in those rugby league markets. So with the NRL going to Vegas last weekend, and there's a bit of a gap in the schedule for the AFL to come in and make their mark there. But yeah, interesting concept. You would have thought probably just have the whole round rather than just the 4 games. But yeah, we've got this odd 4 games and then we start round 1 the week after. So yeah, interesting concept. We'll see how it goes.
Well, it's a bit of wrapping your head around because, you got technically round 2 is like round 1 and opening round. Like it's, still getting used to that in your head when you hear like a game's going to be in round 1, but it's actually technically not the first weekend of the season. How does that, do you feel like sort of impact strategy? Does it at all for some of these teams who are playing because their preseason is technically cut short considering we've got the 2 sides are in the grand final, the 4 prelim sides that are all playing? Does it change anything, do you think, or do you think it's all just the same?
It probably does change things a bit, especially for a team like Carlton. They've got a 6-day break going into their traditional game against against Richmond, sorry. So, yeah, they'll probably leave a few players out that they might have risked otherwise. Sam Walsh, Jacob Wiedering, they're guys that probably won't make the trip up to Brisbane. So, yeah, they'll probably tend to go, they won't take any risks there. So, yeah, it does change a few things there. But, yeah, we'll see how it goes. It's an interesting concept.
Well, let's get into it. The first game, obviously, Thursday night at the SCG, Sydney versus Melbourne. I mean, Melbourne have been dominating all the discourse in recent weeks due to some of the things happening off the field, but now they can focus on the footy on it. They played Carlton. They beat Carlton in that AAMI Community Series game. But how do you see this game going? I mean, Sydney with a few new faces, Melbourne with a host of players who will be absent, but some new faces as well playing for them with a couple debutants.
Yeah, good news for Melbourne. They've had a turbulent summer, but Clayton Oliver confirmed to start in this game. So, yeah, huge news for the Demons. But, yeah, Brodie Grundy, he'll be in the Swans colours this time around. Just the 1 year with Melbourne after that ruck partnership with Max Gawn didn't work out. So, yeah, the Swans will go into a couple of key guys that won't be there. Callum Mills, obviously, with that Mad Monday incident. He won't be there for quite a while. And then, yeah, unfortunately, Taylor Adams, coming from Collingwood, he injured himself in that practice match. So they'll be without him as well, and Luke Parker, the experienced premiership player from 2012. So, yeah, the midfield's definitely going to be tested in this one, the Swans. So Melbourne arguably have the best midfield in the competition. So it'll be interesting to see how the Swans match up there. But, yeah, Brodie Grundy against Max Gawn, that is going to be must-watch stuff for the first game of the season.
How do you see that game going? Who do you think comes away with 4 points?
You'd think up there the Swans get over the line. But, yeah, Melbourne, after what they've gone through this summer, they're heading up there with the points to prove. Everyone's writing them off thinking all the off-field stuff's going to impact them on the field, but class is still there. So maybe the Swans just, but it is a genuine 50-50, this one. But maybe at the SCG, the Swans might get over the line. Yeah,
I'm going to have to agree. I'm going with the Swans. I think with Melbourne having a few of those key forward options and smaller forward options unavailable too, with no Cozzy Pickett, Ben Brown missing as well, Shane McAdam. It's a lot of attacking Arsenal that's out, and we know that if there is one sort of weakness in Melbourne at the moment, it is their forward stocks, which I guess was well documented during their finals push last year. But I think Sydney will just edge the D's on Thursday night. Friday night at the Gabba, Brisbane versus Carlton, a preliminary final rematch. Now, the line's very close to your heart, Ollie. It's a chance to kickstart again after the disappointment of grand final day, but it's going to be a fascinating contest against the Blues, who obviously will also have revenge on their mind for the preliminary final.
Yeah, absolutely. Carlton probably in the end should have won that preliminary final. You go 5 goals up in a prelim final. They had all the momentum, and the Lions got back in that contest. So, yeah, the Blues will be smarting from that one, but what a great season they had overall last year, considering where they came from. But as I mentioned before, those absences that those guys won't be there. Sam Walsh, Jacob Wiedering, such key players. So it is going to be really tough for them. The Lions pretty much at full strength for this one. So you'd think at home the Lions should get the job done. They went 13-0 there at the Gabba last year. It's a very hard place for opposition teams to win. So, yeah, if Carlton can pull that one off, though, that would be a massive start to their season and potentially trying to get into the top four again.
Well, I think as well, Brisbane, as you said, just so good at home. I think their last loss was against Melbourne, I think, at the end of 2022. So it's been, as you said, 13 straight games without a loss at their home ground. And I think that's going to continue. You mentioned the absences for Carlton. You know, Brisbane looking to make a bit of a point, make a bit of a statement to start the year. I think they're just going to be too strong at home. The following day, a little bit further up the highway, it's a new era for both these two teams. Gold Coast against Richmond. Damien Hardwick coaching his first game for the Suns against the Tigers, of course, where he had so much success. And Adam Uze kicking off his coaching tenure at the Tigers. This is a fascinating game because, you know, it's a bit of a step into the unknown for both of these two teams.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Richmond going into a new era. They had Damien Hardwick at the helm for nearly 14 seasons. So it is a big change for the Tigers, and they've lost a lot of players too. As you win premierships, you're going to lose guys at the end of that run. So, yeah, Cochin, Jack Rewalt, they both retired at the end of the last season. So they go up there with a pretty new team. And the Suns weren't convincing at all in the preseason games. I know it is only a practice match, but you would have expected more from them under a new coach. But maybe it will take time for the Suns to just get used to the new Damien Hardwick game style. New coach come in. Sometimes it can take a while. But you'd think that there's so much expectations on the Suns this year. They've never played finals. They have all the talent in the world. They've got one of the greatest coaches of all time going up there. So it would be a massive disappointment for them if they didn't get this one done. Really, it would be a really poor start to their season with what's gone on. So you'd think the Suns, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either if the Tigers caused a bit of an upset considering what the Suns were doing in the pre-season.
Well, it's an interesting one because if there's ever a matchup throughout history which has always sort of favoured Gold Coast, which aren't many head-to-heads, it has been Gold Coast beating Richmond. And, of course, they did get that win up at Metricon a couple of years ago where Noah Anderson scored that goal after the siren.
Carmichael Hunt as well, back in the day.
Back up in Cairns, of course. But I agree. I think the Suns are going to win this game. I think buoyed by the Damien Hardwick effect. I think they're going to be too strong. I think Richmond, it's going to be, I wouldn't say it's going to be a really, really tough year, but I think where the expectations for them are a lot lower this year, given, as you mentioned, all the players that have departed. No Tom Lynch as well this weekend, and then that's a massive hole in the forward line in of itself with Revolt's retirement too. So not sure where the goals will come from in that game. A lot of pressure will fall on the likes of Samson Ryan, Noel Bolter or Jacob Kazitsky. So I think the Suns will be too strong in this game. But opening round wraps up at Giants Stadium over in the West. Another preliminary final rematch. GWS against Collingwood. There's been a bit of, I wouldn't say back and forth, a little bit of one-way, sort of animosity from one end.
The Giants have been throwing a lot of shade Collingwood's way in the pre-season. It's been pretty funny to see.
Yeah, especially on social media. The Giants in particular, so unlucky in that preliminary final. Was an incredible game of footy that the Pies just emerged with the wind. And so, of course, they've got all the motivation to try and get one up on the reigning premiers. How do you see this one going?
Yeah, looking at the odds here, it surprises me. Giants are favourites in this one, but Collingwood are coming off a premiership, and they just always manage to get the job done. If it's close up there, like it was in the prelim final, and it is for most Collingwood games, you'd probably favour the Magpies. But, yeah, it's a genuine 50-50, this one. Like, 1 point in it in that prelim final. It was one of the great games. So Toby Green is always going to be the X factor for the Giants, and if he has a big game and gets off the chain a bit, maybe the Giants can get up, but it really wouldn't surprise me at all if Collingwood just... You look on paper, the odds, they're the underdogs. So they shouldn't be. They're premiers. So they can definitely go up there and get the win. But, yeah, maybe the Giants, but who knows?
It's
a ripper, this one.
Yeah, it's a weird one because I don't think Collingwood's won up there in quite some time as well. Like the GWS have had the wood over them. Of course, a lot of the games have been played in Melbourne recently with all the finals matchups as well, which GWS have obviously, there was level, and then the Pies did get that prelim final win to take that 2-1 advantage in finals. But there are a few key players missing, especially for Collingwood with Dan McStay out for most of this season. I mean, initially it was season ending. Now they're not putting the line through him. No Nathan Murphy, of course, with his concussions. I think it's going to be, as you said, it almost is a flip of a coin in this game. I personally, look, with my heart, I'm going to say Collingwood are going to win this game because I'd like to think that the momentum of winning a premiership will carry through. And I liked what I saw when they played the Tigers, especially in those final 3 quarters. They were a bit inaccurate, but they were able to run over them in the end. And I just think when it comes down to the crunch, if it is close, you know, more often than not, we've seen this script play out a lot throughout the Craig McRae era. I think Collingwood are going to come away with the win. But I reckon if there's any sort of surefire thing I think we're going to see a couple spot fires on the field. I think a few
Mason
of the Collingwood...
Cox.
Well, I think he's going to be public enemy number 1 up there in Parramatta. He hasn't been shy with his views about...
Has not at all.
Yeah, and especially about where the game's going to be played as well. So, you know, he's called it, what was it, a showground or something like
ground
that?
for livestock.
Well, there you go. Well, I'm sure the fans are going to let him know about it. Maybe some of the MacArthur Bulls fans can lend the cowbells from up the road. So, anyways, let's move on to our season preview. We're going to break this up into 4 parts. We're going to look at the teams contending for the top 4, the sides battling out for the remainder of the spots inside the top 8, those teams that are just on the outside but are probably going to miss out, and then the teams who this year in the middle of a rebuild probably more likely going to be playing for draft picks. So let's start with the top 4 contenders. Ollie, who have you got as your teams that are going to be contending for the 4 this year?
Well, I'm with you on Collingwood and Brisbane. They'll have to be back up there again. They haven't lost anything. They're really well-drilled team, so they're definitely in my top 4. But I can probably see Carlton dropping out just because of the expectation on them this year is going to be immense. They made a prelim final last year when no one expected them to, so they're going to get a bit of a harder draw than they did last year. So, but yeah, the Giants will be definitely up there again, and yeah, I can see Sydney pushing up into a top 4. They might start the season slow, just given their injuries in the midfield, but I can see them really coming home with a strong second half to the season.
I think the other team that I think can certainly push that barrier, I think more than likely be bottom half of the 4 is there's this unnerving feeling about Geelong that you just feel like they're going to bounce back
there.
and they're always going to find a way to come back. When you write them off, they always find a way to bounce back, that if everything clicks this year, they might be in amongst it. But I do agree. I think the 2 grand finalists from last year, Collingwood and Brisbane, you can't look past because of just how well stocked they are list-wise. The recruitment with, I know Tom Duday's out for most of this season, but when he comes back,
He'll be back early.
Yeah, solidifies
round 3 or round 4.
Solidifies that defence enormously. Will Ashcroft coming back as well for the Lions. Collingwood bringing in Lockie Schultz. I think they're going to go, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a rematch again this year in the grand final. But yeah, a lot of pressure on Carlton and GWS as well, because I think there would be that element of doubt of, okay, you had a really good second half of the year, but the first half of the season, it hasn't been forgotten. I think they timed that run to perfection and they got wins where they should have. And maybe specifically in Carlton's case, cover your ears, Carlton fans, but they did get away with a couple towards the end of the year when you look at that win against Melbourne late in the year with a bit of a dubious, touched over the line or whatever it was. So I think it's going to be a bit of I think about 5 teams in it. And if you probably throw one more team in there, I think if it all goes right with Melbourne and the off-field distractions don't, sort of mount and doesn't have an impact on the playing list, they've got enough quality to certainly be in amongst it again. Moving on to the rest of the top 8 contenders, who else have you got that's sort of in that bracket of teams battling it out for the final 4 spots?
Yeah, I'm definitely with you with Geelong. They had an off season after that premiership, but you can never write them off. The last 15 years, they've always been thereabouts. Only the second time in 16 years they've missed the finals. And yeah, Chris Scott is one of the great coaches, so having that extra month that they haven't normally had just to prepare and get bodies right is going to be crucial. They were missing a lot of guys in the back half of last season. I think that round 23 or 24 game against the Western Bulldogs, I'm missing probably 11 or 12 of their top liners. So the Western Bulldogs, they could either finish in the top 4 and challenge for a premiership, or they could completely bomb out and probably not even go close to the 8. It just depends on how that off-season review went with Luke Beveridge. A few reinforcements around him. Rowan Smith, an assistant coach, beloved by Luke Beveridge. He goes out. So they've got so much talent, and they had the number 6 draft pick, Riley Sanders. He looks like he's going to be an absolute star. Definitely smoky for the rising star. He killed it in those first 2 practice matches. So, yeah, the Bulldogs will be one to watch either way. St Kilda, if they can have a good run with injury, like I think their best 23 is really good, but they do fall away pretty quickly. Ross Lyon, really well coached. He got them up there in the finals, and yeah, they were in that elimination final against GWS and probably could have pinched that if a few things went their way. But yeah, Melbourne, really, really talented. So I know a lot of people are writing them off, but yeah, I can see them being thereabouts again.
Yeah, I think the other 2 teams to throw in there are the 2 South Australian teams. I think there's a lot of expectation, especially for Port Adelaide this year. You know, very disappointing end to last year with a straight sets exit. They've brought in a lot of key players coming in like Asava Ratugolea, Brandon Zerk-Thatcher. They've really stocked up defensively. And Adelaide would be chomping at the bit after last year, missing out where they probably felt if they got there, they could have caused a little bit of a stir. Yes, well, of course.
Yes. Up in arms about that.
Yep, right in front of them. They were certainly robbed in that. They would certainly think in that game against the Swans towards the end of last season. I think there's a lot of pressure on them because it's the end of the rebuild now, and now I think it's time for them to make that push back into finals contention. Absolutely. And start coming up the ladder. And they've certainly got the ability to do that. So I think that. Yeah, and you mentioned the Bulldogs as well. They can really go either way. I think we just have no idea because they could come out and win a premiership, like as we've seen in recent years. Like when they finished 7th, they were still able to win a flag. So you never know. They've got all the talent in the world to do it, but I think it's going to be a fascinating watch this season. The teams that are sort of could get there if everything goes perfectly, but more than likely going to be on the outside looking in. I've got Gold Coast, Essendon, and more than likely Richmond in that barrier. Have you got anyone else to sort of put in that bracket as teams that could potentially be in there, or maybe deserve a little bit more love?
Yeah, the Suns, I think they have to be pushing for finals. If they just miss out, you can probably give them a pass mark. If they win 11, 12, 13 games and just miss out, but anything less than that, it'd be real big disappointment. They're talking a big game up on the Gold Coast. They're talking finals this year and potential premierships in 2 to 3 years. So they really have the list to be able to challenge now. So I can see the Suns getting inside the 8, but also it might take them a while just to adjust to life under Damien Hardwick. And in previous years, they've started really strongly and then fallen away. But I think it could be the opposite this year. They might start really slow and then they really come home with a wet sail. Richmond, I don't think they can play finals this year. I can't see it. They've lost too much experience. Who knows with Tom Lynch? Like once he does get back, he's such a huge force up forward. But if he gets injured again, there's absolutely no chance, I don't think. Essendon, there were some really promising signs last year under Brad Scott. They were tracking for finals up until Jordan Ridley went down with about 6 games to go, and unfortunately he injured himself in the practice match, so he is a massive loss for them early on. But yeah, I saw enough signs with the Bombers last year that they could push up. Their practice matches were a bit iffy, but yeah, I can see them pushing up, and maybe Freo. Again, their practice matches were very ordinary. They made the semi-finals in 2022, really poor season last year. But you look at some of the wins they notched up last year, really good wins on the road against Melbourne at the MCG, the Swans at the SCG, Geelong in Geelong. You don't know what you're going to get with the Dockers. So, yeah, I could see the Dockers pushing up, but, I think that's about it for those lower to middle tier sort of teams.
Yeah, I guess my one qualm with Freo is they've just lost so many players over the last 2 years, and it's another year with Nat Fyfe, and it's always a what if with him and his body. And I know they're not probably as reliant on him as maybe they once were, but I just have my concerns in that sense about their consistency. And I know that the pressure would be on this year to reach a level where they were a couple of years ago, where I think the bar got set quite high, winning a final, as you said, and, that sort of push of being right in the mix for the top 4 when it came down to the last couple of weeks of the season. So I think they're going to be an interesting watch this year. But I think, as you said, the Bombers, they were, probably about 5 or 6 games to go. I think, there was every reason to suggest they were going to make the finals. I remember, being at that game against Carlton where they won before Queen's birthday, and you're thinking to yourself, my God, they're like, look at the complete polar opposites of the teams at that point. Then you saw how the season ended for both those teams. It was light years apart. So you do wonder if they can find that spark again, whether they can find the whole consistent year, whether they've got the players, they've got the raw talent, but a lot of young guys that are still coming through who might not have the consistency yet. So whether they can take that leap will be an interesting watch this year. The teams this year down the bottom, it's looking likely it's probably going to be around about the same 3 teams that made up the bottom 3 last year in Hawthorn, West Coast and North Melbourne. Can you see any of those sides making any sort of inroads this year? I know there's been a lot of talk about North Ball and Hawthorn bringing in some nice players over the last couple of years and good draft picks, but can you really see any change in that this season?
North have looked really promising in the pre-season, but they would want to. It's been a grim 4 or 5 years for them. So under Clarko, he didn't really get a run at it last year. He was in and out of the coaching setup. So it's probably his first proper season as coach. So they really came out blazing. And as you said, North Ball, they want to try something new this year, really attacking style that might find them caught out against the better teams. So they might score big, but get scored really heavily against as well. So you'd think North would win more than the 3 games they did last year. There'll be a gradual improvement there. If they could get to 5 or 6 wins this year, I think they'd be happy with that, and then look to really improve again in 2025. But you can pretty much lock West Coast into the bottom again. They just keep finding ways for their players to get injured. It's incredible. Like last year, they had a shocking run at it, and that's just continued in the pre-season as well. They've had more guys go down, but Hawthorn as well, they've had a shocking run in the pre-season too. They're without a lot of players early on in the season. And Sam Mitchell had his own issues over in New York on holidays. He was very ill over there, so it took him a while to get back into training as well. But Hawthorn showed a lot of promising signs last year. That's some big wins. They beat Brisbane and Collingwood.
Yeah.
They beat both the grand finalists, but then they couldn't beat some of the teams that they're supposed to beat. So, it might be a bit of a steady sort of year for Hawthorn. They might win the 6 or 7 games that they did last year again, and then they'd really look to take the big step in 2025. But it's really hard to see them going up the ladder too much, just given the probably top 16, probably 15, 16 teams at the top. That it's just so even. It's such an even competition, probably the most even it's been since the AFL first started. West Coast have been so poor that the rest of the teams they can challenge on any given day.
Yeah, I mean, with Hawthorn last year, as you mentioned, like when they were at their best, they were very, very good. I mean, you remember those, as you mentioned, those 2 games and how they battered Collingwood in particular in that last game. They really, with their contested work in particular, they was so good. But you do get a sense that even if they do win 7 games, maybe in another year that gets you up to about 14th. But you speak about how level it is, that you could finish 15th this year and end up with pick 4, pick 5, whatever it might be. But you might have 9 or 10 wins to your name. That's how tight it could be this season. So it's almost like, yes, bottom 4 might look bad or bottom 5 might look bad when it's on a ladder, but really when you look at the wins and losses and the percentages and everything, it might all just come down to that at the end of the day. So those 50-50 games where a lot of these teams play each other, it's going to be interesting to see what sort of way it goes. But you mentioned West Coast. I mean, it is still, I think, weird to wrap your head around that West Coast are down the bottom because they've been so good at parachuting back up so quickly. Like when they've had a down year, they're usually right back in contention the next. But it's just been, disaster after disaster after disaster. And I think a lot of West Coast fans will just be hoping for the green shoots of Harley Reid this year. So much expectation on him. I think there's even more expectation on Harley Reid than probably. I know that Nick Dacos came through and all the young guns, but the way that they've pumped him up over in Perth, it's like he's the second coming over there.
Every single day, he'll be on the back page. That is just so much burden to carry for an 18-year-old kid who's travelled across the country, grew up in country Victoria, and all of a sudden he's the talk of a city every single day. So there's so much pressure there, whereas some of these other guys, Riley Sanders, who I mentioned earlier at the Western Bulldogs, he's number 6 draft pick, and he comes into a pretty good team already and can sort of just cruise on in, and there's not as much pressure on him. But yeah, with Harley Reid, by far the most hyped draft pick we've ever seen. You did mention Dacos, and he just shoot it out of the blocks, but it was different. He was coming into a pretty good team as well, and yeah, he was definitely ready for that pressure. He was coming into Collingwood. He's grown up in a famous family, so he had that time to prepare himself for what was coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's going to be I think an ongoing story all year to see how Harley goes with it. I just hope that, just from his sake, he's just take a step back a little bit, the pressure on him, and he's got the right people around him, and I'm sure West Coast have put up the right sort of protection to make sure that he stays on the right track as well. And it seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders. So I'm interested to see how Harley Reid sort of plays out this year and how he goes, because I think everyone's expecting him to win the Rising Star too. So we'll see what he can do in 2024. But that's it for today, Ollie. I mean, it's going to be a great opening round. Sorry, not round one. We'll get there next week. But it's great to have footy back this week. So thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks.
Well, you can be back next week for a full review of the 4 games this weekend, and of course a preview of round 1 and all the big talking points to emerge from opening round. My name's been Nick Dabano, and have a good weekend in footy.